Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind Body Couple podcast. Today, I'm very honored to have Anna Holtzman. And Anna, you're a licensed therapist and coach who helps creatives, entrepreneurs, coaches move through fear and self doubt so they can grow their work in the world without abandoning themselves. After healing her own chronic migraines using mind body techniques and supporting others in the chronic pain recovery for the last 5 years, Anna became passionate about helping people navigate the what's next chapter after pain. So thanks so much for being on with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Tanner, and it's such a pleasure to meet you again. The first time was in person, which was awesome, and it's so nice to meet you again virtually like this.
I know it's very lovely. We were saying right before we went on that we saw each other in person, which is rare in this day and age, but in
Yeah.
person in Boulder, Colorado in September for the last big mind body conference, which was
Yes.
wonderful.
And when I met you, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I know you because 'cause I've been following along with your work online and through your podcast." So, it's
And
nice to connect like this.
it's an interesting world because we know of one another. Like there's
Yeah.
probably, 10 big kind of Instagram podcasts like out there. So I knew you well. I feel like I knew you before I met you because
Yeah,
I'd seen
same.
so many of your videos and liked so many of them along the way, and then we finally got to meet.
Yeah, it's funny, I don't know. Yeah, I've made a bunch of friends that way, which you think you start an Instagram account to do marketing for your business, but it's an amazing way to connect with colleagues and make friendships.
It really is. It really is. Well, thanks again for doing this. So I thought we'd start, Anna, by maybe sharing a bit of your own personal story around recovering from chronic pain and symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I'll take us back quite a ways just to start that off. So, before I became a therapist and a coach, I I've had a very, very, winding professional path. I've done a lot of different things,
Yeah.
and, I worked in reality television for 10 years as a video editor, and, on the very first day of my first job in that field, I experienced my first ever migraine attack. It was like, a very stressful day, high stakes day on this very high pressure job, and I
Yeah.
got this just blowout headache, that I'd never experienced before. Over the course of the 10 years that I worked in that field, I continued to experience those headaches very sporadically at first, and then I eventually, um, went to a doctor and was diagnosed with migraine and was given prescription painkillers to deal with them, um, and that was basically how I managed migraine for those 10 years that I worked in TV. Was just taking painkillers, and that actually worked fine, and it wasn't a massive intrusion into my life until I left that field and went to grad school to become a therapist, and it
Yeah.
was while I was in grad school that the migraine attacks really began to balloon and take over my life, and it was like 3 days out of the week, I'd be totally taken out and having to miss classes in grad school and miss, sessions with the clients I was working with in my clinical internship, and it, became a really emergency feeling situation,
Yeah.
um and so when things really came to a head and I was feeling very scared and desperate and freaked out, I finally did the thing that people often do when they get the first twinge, but I hadn't done up until then, which was I went to Google to find out what else can you do for migraine other than take a painkiller. And I was very fortunate because the year was 2018 and the Curable app had come out just recently, I think 2 years before that.
Oh,
And for
wow.
those listeners who might not know about the Curable app, it's, an app that teaches you about chronic pain recovery through the mind-body lens, and it was like, it instantly made sense to me. It was the missing piece I'd been looking for. I already had a quite holistic orientation, and I was studying to be a therapist, as I mentioned, so this
Yeah.
approach was a perfect fit for me, and I just, went down the rabbit hole and gradually recovered from that chronic cycle. It took a few years, and then yeah, and then it became the focus of my work. It was such a life-changing experience and so fascinating too. It's just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I appreciate
Yeah.
you sharing that. Um, and I relate to you there. It's because I was in my undergrad becoming a therapist at the time when
Oh,
my pain
wow.
started,
Yeah.
and kinda in between undergrad, graduate when I developed, but it is even as therapists, like, we don't necessarily realize, like, what's going on internally as
Yeah,
we're kinda dealing with things because we're just not taught this
absolutely.
about pain or chronic symptoms.
No, not at all, and the therapist that I was working with, where I was her client, she
Yeah.
had not been taught this framework either, and so, like, I was, seeing a somatic experiencing therapist for 10 years, and it was very helpful in lots of ways, and, you know, that experience helped me to understand and believe that the physical pain I was experiencing was related to emotional stress, but that understanding was, not, um I w she and I were both missing the piece of, okay, well, now what do you do with that information that these things are connected? How do you then use that connection to recover? And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I found the Curable app that I started to
Yeah.
learn those missing pieces.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
so as you were healing, obviously recovering, things are going well. I know the listeners always want to know, like, what were the main kind of
Yeah.
strategies, practices? Like, what were you
Oh,
spending your
yeah.
time doing, like, during the healing process?
I'd love to talk about that. I've talked about this many times, but it's actually been a while, and it's nice to revisit it. Um, so the way I experienced my recovery was that in hindsight, it had several kind of distinct stages to it. And the first stage was when I found the Curable app and I was like devouring all of the psychoed that app provides. And so the first thing that really started to change things for me with psychoeducation was just like learning a new conception of what pain is and learning this framework that pain is a danger signal that the nervous system sends off when it feels unsafe. And so that just instantly started to change everything for me. It's like, oh, painful sensation means my nervous system feels unsafe. Well, that's helpful because then all right, how do I help my nervous system feel safer? And now I have something to do. I know what the problem is, so I can experiment with different ways to address that problem. So that was the first stage. And that was something I explored and practiced for about a whole year and started to see changes in the frequency and intensity of the migraine attacks. I
Well,
started to see changes almost immediately. That doesn't mean they all went away immediately. It was like, "Oh, things are reducing, and then they're picking back up again, and then they're reducing," and, it's like not a
yeah.
straight line. And then about a year into, um, practicing brain retraining, I'll just say, uh, I I felt like I had hit a wall. Like I had made some improvements, but I was still getting these really extreme attacks periodically.
Yeah.
And I felt like I needed a new tool to add to my toolkit, and I'd been hearing about journaling as a tool. I mean, that's one of the tools in the Curable app, and it was the only tool in the Curable app that I just had completely avoided. Didn't know why, but didn't wanna do it, avoided it,
Yeah.
and so I thought, "Well, if that's the one thing I haven't tried, let me try journaling, and I came across Nicole Sax's work. She's her whole thing is journaling for chronic pain recovery, and she has a very prescriptive method of doing it, so I just learned her method, copied it down, was like threw myself into it, and for about another year, I practiced journaling daily, almost religiously. Um, Started off practicing it in an energy of, like, desperation, like, "I need to do this because I need to recover from this pain." But as I got more and more into it, I started to really love it. It started realizing I was developing a new and deeper relationship with myself through journaling, and that was really amazing to me because I was like, "I've been in therapy for years at that point," and I was even, en route to becoming a therapist already. Actually, I know already was a therapist at that point,
Yeah.
but I was like, "Wow, through this journaling, I'm having these emotional exchanges with myself on a level that's much deeper than I knew was possible." I started using Nicole's method and then gradually improvised my own method where I was dialoguing with myself on the page, like having the conversation between therapist and client, but I was both roles.
Yeah.
Um, and that for me was the most deeply transformative element of my recovery. Um but there
Yeah.
were a couple of stages after that, and, the next one was, like, acceptance and letting go. There came a point where I realized that the journaling was great, but I was doing it with such intensity and, such, like, expectation of outcome, and that intensity was bringing more pressure into my nervous system, so I had to loosen up with my practices, get a little less religious about them. Um, I shifted my like, w what I was aiming for, I shifted it from less pain to just being more loving with myself,
Yeah.
and that was really helpful. And then kind of and sort of stage 4, but it's very similar, was letting go of perfectionism around this idea that I had to be 100% healed, and that was something that really kicked up when I started to, um, put myself out there as a chronic pain therapist. Once I
Mm.
started telling people that this was something I could help them with, that triggered this perfectionism in me, like, "Oh, well, I've gotta be completely healed if I'm gonna help other people with this." And, of course, that only created a massive amount of pressure. I could feel it, my clients could feel it. It wasn't helping me, and so I realized, this is the next step. I've gotta let go of that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I decided to use this phrase that I am 100% imperfectly healed, so I can just let that go.
Yeah. I really like that. That's beautiful. And I appreciate you kind of breaking down the different phases.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure the listeners will get a lot from that because there are phases to this. And this kind of
There are.
leads into the work that you're doing now of like the
Yeah.
what next chapter, which we're going to dive into in a second here. But there are stages to this. Um, as we kind
Mhm.
of go along. I think I relate to you a lot. The perfectionism is one of the later stages, um, and I think it's it and I see a lot in your content this lens of perfectionism, pressure, how this affects our nervous system, the emotional effect, and starting to reduce that as we go. But I so much relate to you as you talk about it because if you ever want your perfectionism to be really tested, just go publicly on video,
Yeah,
like once a week or on your
totally.
podcast. Now all of a sudden,
Mhm.
regardless of how many people are watching, you're like, "Oh, I need to be like a certain way. I need to be this way or that way." Um, yeah, so
Absolutely.
it's a difficult thing, but I think that's That's wonderful, and, really what I wanna talk with you about, Anna, and I know you're super passionate about this, is that kinda like what next chapter, like
Yeah.
after pain? Because
Yeah.
think people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here because this is kind of your area of expertise, but I think people often think they get to this line of like, my pain's no longer chronic, or my symptoms no longer chronic, or whatever that means. And they almost see it as this like completion, like, okay, it's
Mhm.
done. We've dealt with it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not that. Like that's not the path that I've taken personally, that I know you've taken, and every person I've kind of worked with, right? Is there's
Yeah.
always this continuous work that needs to happen.
Yeah, well, there were and, yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'd also offer, like, there's just possibility opens up because when
Mm,
we're in that locked up chronic pain cycle, it's like one way to describe it is that our energy is very locked in. Like we're bracing and tightening around our life energy. So you know, however you talk about this experience, I think we can probably all relate to this description of it, that it's like there's all this energy stuck inside of us. The energy feels stuck or stagnant, or maybe it feels like it's bursting to come out, but it can't. And there's this like frustration feeling. And when things start to soften and we start going easier on ourselves and start helping our nervous system to feel a little safer and things start to relax, this energy starts to flow again. It's like this iceberg inside of us starts to melt and flow, and it wants somewhere to go. So when I was getting to this stage of my recovery, there was like a different sort of discomfort that emerged for me. It was like suddenly, and it wasn't so sudden. This is like it's a gradual process, but there reached a stage where I was like, I've got all this energy inside me. And it's got nowhere to go because I've been so focused on healing for so long. And now that that's not my full-time pursuit anymore, I sort of feel like antsy and like almost jittery. Like I've got all this energy flowing and it
mm,
wants something to be poured into.
yeah.
Um and I would see that with clients too, because many of my clients would stay with me beyond the point where pain was, a focal issue anymore. And what I would see, I would see a range of things with them. One end of things was they were they were better, and sure, they're still they would experience symptoms like things crop up, but that's being human, right? But there was this habitual focus on the symptoms, and they, continue to come into session wanting to talk about symptoms even though, they were able to do anything they wanted to do with their lives at this point. And I could see that the continued focus on symptoms, it had been necessary in earlier times, but it was now becoming unhelpful, and we needed some other focus of attention to move toward. And then for others, it was just this kind of natural blooming and blossoming that would happen. One client had used journaling as part of her recovery, and then she just never stopped writing, and the writing turned into a book. And she published a book while we were working together. And that was, I was like, gosh, freaking love working with people at this stage because that wasn't without its challenges. There were all these new kinds of fears that came up with that process of writing the book and sharing um, personal experiences about family and life and then publishing it and all the fears of will I get in trouble if I share this out loud, or will people even read it? Does what I have to say even matter? Um, and I just really, really relish working with people in that stage of things, and I was naturally moving into that stage of things myself, wanting to share more of my own creativity, my own writing. I started a podcast at that point, and yeah, just wanting to expand.
Yeah. And well, there's so much in what you just said there that is important takeaways. I've seen both those pathways that you kind of identified, right? Where I've worked with people where they basically don't have chronic symptoms anymore. Like we could say definitively, like they don't have chronic symptoms. Like maybe they pop up now and then, but the hyper focus and the obsession is so locked on,
Yeah,
kind of like you said, on their body, even though symptom wise using this work, they've gotten better.
yeah,
And then other people have more of this natural flow of flowing out into doing more. One thing it makes me think about, uh, I don't know if you remember this. You posted this. I can't remember how long ago it was, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but you can correct me. You posted this idea. I think it was an Instagram post. It really hit home for me though. You had kind of said something around the lines of, I thought I would become pain free, and I would do that by making my world calmer, smaller, kind of more stillness. You remember this?
yeah, I
More
totally do.
stillness.
Yeah,
But what I discovered is actually what happened is like my symptoms reduced, went away as my world became bigger, more vibrant, more alive. Probably not the exact words you're
yes,
saying, but I think that's
yeah.
such a useful narrative for people to be aware of as they're starting to get better.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. Um, I this comes up so frequently with my current clients, where yeah, and I experienced this too, which is why I wrote about it, that when when the symptoms are high and persistent and they're a big problem in our lives, I think there's this common narrative and really like a widespread cultural belief that we just need to rest and get quiet and stop doing everything, including the things that we love to do, including the things and maybe even especially the things that we're passionate about.
Mhm.
Because, and this often happens with creative people. I've seen a lot of like musicians and filmmakers, writers who have thought and sometimes even been told by their friends, their family members, or even their doctors that engaging in these pursuits just gets them too worked up, and that's putting stress on their nervous system, so they need to take it easy and stop painting or stop making music or stop making films or writing because it just gets them too worked up.
Yeah,
And that really breaks my heart because it doesn't work. And I know that from firsthand experience. Like
yeah.
I've experienced getting caught in that trap too, where I've thought like this happened to me with when I got to that stage in my recovery where my energy needed something new to plug into because recovery wasn't and didn't have to be a full-time job anymore. The
Mhm.
thing that it plugged itself into was growing my business, my coaching business. I was like, I come from a media background, so I love marketing. I love
Yeah,
creating infographics. I love creating blog posts and Instagram posts and videos and podcasts. Like, that's my creativity zone. And I just got, like, really passionate about it. And there was a certain amount of, like, intensity that I brought to it, and using the past tense, but, like, this is still something I navigate and dance with,
yeah,
like, I can get pretty worked up and intense because, um, there's, like, excitement that I feel, but then it can, like, be mixed with a strain of fear-fueled thoughts, and that can just lead to
Mhm.
short circuiting, hitting a wall, crashing into some burnout in my business. And at an earlier stage, I did hit one of these, like I'd been going on all circuits for, like, a while and was like, "This is so fun and exciting. I'm creating stuff. I'm really feeling inspired." And then, I hit a wall, and initially I thought, "Oh gosh, just my ambition is a problem.
Mhm.
It's pushing me to I thought my ambition is pushing me into burnout, so I just need to lower my expectations. I need to make my vision for this business smaller. I need to just really," and I was like, I'm gonna be 50 in a few years, like, I just need to chill out and live a smaller life, and then my nervous system will calm down." But what actually happened was, like, I got into a bit of a funk. I started getting a
Mhm.
little depressed 'cause I was bored,
Yeah.
um, and I realized, like, this is not the way. Like, getting smaller is not gonna get me to the feeling I wanna feel. Being ambitious is something I enjoy. Being creative is something I enjoy. Expanding my work is something I enjoy, but I need to be kind to myself while I'm doing those things. I need to recognize when I'm, like, driving myself like a drill sergeant, and then, shift that to a more encouraging, loving coach.
Yeah. And for people only listening to this, I'm smiling right now because I relate so much to this.
Yeah,
And you're right. Like it is, this I think is one of the harder things that I have to work on with people. Um, because it's so complex in
yeah,
almost understanding our own nervous system and where those like edges are. You know what I mean? Like, because, like, you
yeah,
have on one spectrum, complete Zen mode, where you're, like, just in ultimate calmness, which no one can maintain forever,
yeah.
but that's one spectrum, and I think there's value in that spectrum, like, it's great to be there sometimes. And then the other in the middle, you have, like, this passionate creativity, almost purposeful action that you're taking, that you're excited about. And then on the other side, you have more that this is where like perfectionism, I think, can kind of land. Um, high pressure, pushing past our limits, not being connected to our body. And I think it's such a
And I think there's,
slip.
like, an element of addiction in it. Like, I
Yeah.
can get pulled into, like, sort of addiction to that adrenaline mode.
Oh, yeah. I 100% agree
Yeah,
because several years ago, what would happen is I would get an idea, a brilliant idea, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is a
yeah,
great idea for a project. Like, I'm gonna do this project." And within 2 hours, I was, like, deep in fight or flight
yeah,
around
yeah,
the expectations, meeting those expectations. Um, yeah, like, it's just, like, we get so used to living there, I think, for a lot
yes,
of people, at least in my personal experience.
absolutely.
And I think a big problem with perfectionism, high intensity is a lot of us, we live in all or nothing. That's, like, at least how I understood the world. It was like all or nothing.
Yeah,
Like either I'm gonna do this fully or I'm not gonna do this. There was but like that passion, that creativity, as you were kind of talking, I kind of see that in those shades of gray. Like it's in the middle where you still have this drive and purposeful action taking place, but you haven't pushed yourself so far in that direction that starts to become very dysregulating.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just as you were speaking, I was flashing back to a moment, actually just earlier this week. So one of the current projects that was like, I have an idea for a project. I want to write a book. And I'm in the process of writing this book now. And my process at the moment is I write one section once per week. And I look forward to it and I enjoy it, and something I've noticed is that when I like, when I'm preparing to do that writing, I've, like, decided, such and such time of day and week is when I'm gonna do it, and I always do this writing in a cafe because that's where I like to do my writing, and I'll notice that as I'm walking to the cafe with my laptop over my shoulder, my breath starts to get more shallow, and my shoulders are getting tense, and my mind starts to race a little, and then thoughts start to come in like, "Oh my gosh, am I gonna have any inspiration today? I better get to the cafe quick before the inspiration runs out, and I better, like, write really, really fast so I can, like, catch it before,"
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Oh, okay. Okay, I see what's happening. You care about this a lot, so the stakes are really high." So the excitement is intermingling with fear, and your nervous system is getting all wound up. So, you know what? We're just going to remind ourselves that these fear stories are not true. Your creative energy is not finite, there's plenty of it. If it flows today, great. If it doesn't, that's also fine. And we're going to take some deep breaths because we've got to make this sustainable, or we can
Mhm.
easily fry our own circuits. And
Yeah.
sometimes that happens. You know what? Sometimes I do fry my own circuits, and that's not the end of the world. I can recover from it, and that's an important piece of it for me too, because it's so easy to also get perfectionistic with keeping ourselves in a steady flow.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that because I do think it's yeah, like it's doing this and essentially like practicing being passionate and being excited and practicing driving towards some purpose, whatever that might be for someone. You know, that's not that's not going to be perfect as we practice that. That's the
Yeah.
idea. Like it's for all of us. Like there's times where I've like gone deeply into fight or flight. Even though I went in with the best intentions to do it this way. I think this is the harder stuff after we're starting to heal or we've gotten better and now we're learning like how do we want to live in our life now that we
Yeah.
don't have all this energy pent up around pain physical symptoms. What do we want to focus on in life? How do we want to go about living our day each day? I think there's
Yeah.
so many questions that beg to be explored around some of that.
Yeah, and what I find and what I see in clients too is like, yeah, we don't have as much constriction holding us back anymore. And in addition to that, we do have all of these like really hard won skills and knowledge and tools that we were sort of, forced to learn through the chronic pain experience. Like, had it not been for the migraines that I was dealing with, like, I would never have bothered diving so deeply into learning how to communicate with my nervous system, learning how to emotionally relate with myself in a different way. Like, those were hard things to learn. I don't think anything would have motivated me to learn them other than, pain or something equally as disruptive.
Yeah.
Um, but now I have those skills and those tools, so it's like, what do I wanna use them for? What do I wanna apply them to?
Mhm. Now, the last thing I know we really want to discuss today, I know it's a big part of some of the themes you see in your work with people, is almost this opposite back and forth of people having this like deep desire to be seen, to share their work within the world, and
Mm.
simultaneously, they have this fear, right? This fear of
Yes.
being visible, of taking up space. Can you tell me a bit about this theme that you often see, in the folks that
Yeah.
you
Yeah, this is something that's just so close to my heart, and I feel really connected to because it's something that I experience, it's something that I see in nearly all of my clients, and it's what you were saying. It's this just this really intense, longing and pull to be known, to share what's true and genuine from inside of ourselves with the world, and yeah, just to, like, bring our voice into the world in some way, whether it's actually with our voice through speaking or singing or through writing or just simply through, um, being more of our full selves in our interactions with other people, in our work, in our way of moving through the world. So, yeah, this really strong and compelling need to share ourselves authentically, and then simultaneously this fear that often takes the form of like, am I going to get in trouble if I speak openly, or if I am myself, if I let myself be seen, if I take my mask off, am I going to get in trouble? Are people still going to like me? Are they going to accept who I really am? Um, will it matter to anyone? Will anyone listen, or will too many people listen, and will I feel overwhelmed by that?
Yeah.
And yeah, this is I mean, it's something I just can relate to so deeply, so it's very tender to me, and I just love walking people through this and
Yeah.
helping clients sort of, learn how to gently guide themselves through it, because I think that we all have really, really valuable stuff to share with each other. I think
Mhm.
we know this instinctively, like, anytime you've had a deeply vulnerable conversation with someone and they've shared something that's, like, just so true and so human, like, we just get so much out of it. We feel, like, this relief of, like, "Oh, I'm not alone in the world." Even if my experience is different, like, the fact that you're sharing openly with me just gives me permission to also be myself. It's just it's kind of the greatest experience we can have, and so many of us hold ourselves back from it because of this fear. So, to me, it's so worthwhile, not just for my clients or for myself, but for everyone around us. It's worthwhile to spend the time and the care that it takes to work through these fears so that we can share more openly.
Mhm. And yeah, it is such a common theme, and I think some people don't realize it because, well, everyone has different experiences with pain, with symptoms. Myself, I probably didn't feel seen, and then when I came out of symptoms, it's like I desperately wanted to feel seen, and then when that started to happen, there was this, like, pulling back of, like, "Oh, no, like, I don't want that." Even though I desperately
Mhm.
want it, like, you know what I mean? Like, there was this
Yeah,
push and pull that we almost need to bring words to and understand what's working through, and I think about it almost, I might be simplifying it, so I apologize, but I think about it almost more as, like, this exposure kinda work that people are doing where they're
absolutely.
and that could look a lot of ways, but giving yourself exposure to authentically being
Yeah.
yourself or authentically sharing something, even if it's to one person, but
Yes,
all those little bits, like, that's what teaches us, like, "Oh, like, I'm safe to do this." Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely, and I also use that framework and that phrasing of graded exposure when I'm working with clients on this, um, and just being with someone who is helping to guide you, someone who has already walked through this particular path and isn't afraid of it anymore. It's so helpful when like, I'll give 2 related examples. So, when a client is in recovery from chronic pain and their, movement has been painful, it's really helpful to work with a therapist or a coach who's already been through the process with themselves and with many other clients, and they know that even though the nervous system feels scared, it is safe to get back into movement. So their confidence, the coaches or the therapist's confidence helps the client's nervous system feel a little more safe, safe enough to take one step, pause, regroup, get some, co-regulation with their coach or therapist, take another step, and gradually the nervous system feels safer and safer. And, I walk my clients through similar experiences, but I'll use one of my own as an example. I really wanted to speak on stage, and it was something I wanted to do very much, but I was terrified. Deathly terrified of it. I mean, just the thought of it could send me into, like, brain fog and feeling frozen in my body and just totally spaced out and at a loss for words. And I worked with a speaking coach, and it was a group program, so not only was I working with a coach who was very confident speaking on stage, but I was with other people who were also working through this fear side by side with me. And as I went through that program, I was like, whoa, this is graded exposure, what we're doing. And with each small enough step that I take in a safe enough, supportive enough environment, my nervous system is feeling just a little bit safer. It's relaxing just a little bit more. The brain fog is alleviating a little more. I have a little bit more access to self-connection, and that just grew and grew with every step. Same thing, graded exposure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, Anna, just the amazing work that you're doing. I wanted to save a little time at the end just so you can share a bit about your practice and possibly
Yeah.
who or how people can work with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanner. I so appreciate, getting to have this conversation with you and appreciate the invitation to share about the work that I'm doing. And I am currently working with one-on-one clients. I'm coaching one-on-one clients, and I welcome any listener who feels ready for this stage of things, who is maybe perhaps coming out of a chronic pain recovery experience and is wanting to expand into the next thing in their life. Maybe you're wanting to write a book or step on stage or start a business or just dive more fully into whatever feels purposeful in your life. Um, and you might be feeling both excitement and fear about it. That is exactly the spot where I love to work with people, help you learn some tools that will completely make sense if you're already familiar with the mind body lens,
Yeah.
um, and take those steps one by one so that you can step into that next stage and that thing that you're passionate about.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, I will make sure I put um, a description of you and your practice, but also all the links in the description of
Oh,
this
yeah.
episode for anyone listening. They can go to the description and check that out.
Thank
But
you.
thank you again for it's great to see you again since September. And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, and hopefully we'll be in person eventually again at a conference in the near future.
I hope so too, and I can't wait to have you on my podcast because that's coming up soon as well.
That's right, we're doing that in a month or so, so that'll be great.
Yeah,
So I'll see you soon, actually, thinking
yeah,
about it now.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tanner.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening, and I will talk to you all next week.